what's up? Today, I'm gonna show you guys my two favorite ways to combine cheese and bread. The first is a classic French cheese puff known as a gougere, and the second is an aged cheese flatbread I learned how to make as a bread baker that's so good, it literally makes you feel insane when you eat it. First up is the French cheese puff, also known as gougere. It's a perfect snack for a civilized pre-dinner glass of champagne. To get started, I'll grab a high-sided saucepan. Into it measure 325 grams of whole milk, 175 grams or 1.5 sticks of butter, and 15 grams of salt. Next, I'll move this pot over to the stove and then bring the milk butter up to a simmer. That's best to do over medium-low heat to prevent the milk from scorching. Now, once this mixture is simmering, I'm gonna get things moving with my whisk and then add in 300 grams of all-purpose flour. I'll whisk this vigorously to make sure it ends up clump-free, because just like for the Roman gnocchis that I showed you guys last week, the starch in the flour is going to gelatinize almost instantly when it hits hot liquid, so you got to keep it moving. Right when there seems to be no more clumps to whisk out, the whisk actually becomes useless because the flour is all gunked up in the loops there. So I'll switch that out with a rubber spatula or a wooden spoon, and then I'll turn the heat down to low and cook this while stirring frequently for another 5 to 10 minutes. After that 10 minutes, I've got a fully cooked and thoroughly gelatinized pile of starch, also known in France as pâte à choux. If you're wondering, hey Bri, what is that? Well, pâte à choux is a super versatile twice-cooked French pastry dough that can be made into eclairs, cream puffs, profiteroles, beignets, churros, and most importantly, cheese puffs. This is just the first stage of two though, so from here I'm going to move this dough over to the bowl of my stand mixer and then add in 175 grams of a nutty, aged Alpine-style cheese. In this case, I'm using Gruyere cheese. I like Gruyere because it's widely available, pretty affordable, and tastes really good. It's nutty and robust like a proper cow's milk Alpine cheese should be, and it's not overly dry. Dry cheeses like cheddar or Parmesan tend to make these cheese puffs kind of oily and heavy. Now, the paddle goes on and I'll spin this up on high speed for 20 to 30 seconds or until the cheese is properly mixed in with the cooked flour base. And now with the mixer running on high speed, I'm gonna grab 6 large eggs and then add them in one at a time. As soon as the first one's incorporated, I'll drizzle in the next, and the next, and the next, and once all 6 of my eggs are in the dough here, I'm going to stop the mixer and give everything a quick scrape down to make sure everything is getting mixed together well. I'll mix for only another 15 to 20 seconds or so, because with pâte à choux dough destined to be cheese puffs, I find that less mixing is more. Once I've got a nice golden, shiny dough like this, I'm going to grab a large freezer bag, fold it over the backside, and then pop that into a high-sided container. From there, I'll move my pâte à choux dough over into the bag, and now I've got a poor man's piping bag. This actually works really well, but only if you have a higher quality, thicker freezer bags. The cheapy ones tend to melt or rip, unfortunately. Once the air is pushed out, the zip is sealed up, and the dough is pushed down into one corner like this, I'll grab a knife and cut about 1 to 1.5 inches off of the corner. That's going to be an opening that's large enough to let this very thick, sticky dough squeeze through. Now to pipe these out, I'm going to move over to a half sheet tray lined with some parchment paper, and I'll squeeze out about 3 tablespoons worth, or like the size of a small lime. I'm going to use a knife here to cut the dough as well, because like I said, it's real sticky and it's not going to easily separate on its own. I'll pop out another 11 of these cheese balls, but if you wanted to, there's enough dough here to make 18 to 24 in total. And once I've got 12 pretty puffs piped like this, I'm going to throw them into a 400F oven to bake for 20 to 22 minutes. When it comes to the puffing part of this cheese puff, the eggs actually are doing all of the heavy lifting, especially in the last 30% of the bake. It kind of looks like nothing's happening at first, and then boom, all of a sudden these things are ripping open and looking insane. After 20 minutes of bake time here, I'm going to come back and open the oven door and turn off the oven and leave the gougeres inside to set for 5 more minutes. This is kind of like cheesecake in that if you were to take these out and expose them to a large temperature shift, they might collapse. And after 5 minutes of chilling with the door open, there you go, a light, subtle, crisp, elegant puff of cheese. The Gruyere is deeply nutty and round, and the butter, milk, and eggs all team up to make this thing super rich, tender, and classically French. So pop a bottle of Cremant or champagne and serve your friends a coupe and a gouge. They're going to think you're very civilized. Okay, cheese bread 2 is more bread than it is pastry dough, and it's my attempt to copy a beloved item on the Union Loafers bakery menu. It's actually just called cheesy bread. To make it, I'll combine 330 grams of warm water, 4 grams of instant yeast, 25 grams of olive oil, 10 grams of sugar, 475 grams of bread flour, and then 14 grams of salt. Now the dough hook goes on, and I'll mix this for 2 minutes on low speed, or until the dough goes from dry stuff like this into sticky, wet stuff like this. From there, the mixer goes up to high speed and I'll mix for another 6 to 7 minutes. After 7 minutes on high speed, you'll see that this dough is clear in the bowl like it should, but when I stop the mixer and give it the trusted tug test to determine gluten strength, it doesn't really hold itself up. The thing about this dough is that it's adapted from a focaccia dough, meaning that it's quite wet and sticky, but that's all to be expected. I'm going to be doing some SBFs in a minute here to shore up the strength, so no big deal. For now, I'm going to flip this into a medium bowl, cover it with a lid, and then make myself a cup of coffee from the sponsor of this video, Trade Coffee. Trade Coffee is a personalized coffee subscription that connects you with independent, sustainable coffee roasters from across the country. If you're someone like me who loves the taste of great coffee but is a non-expert, Trade is a really great resource. You just take their quick online quiz and then they match you with a coffee that fits your tastes however you like to drink it. I use a drip machine, I like it black, and I like it frickin' wild when it comes to flavor. Based on my answers, my first match was this Swiss water processed decaf coffee from PT's out of Topeka, Kansas. And it's real good. It's super flavorful with some hints of chocolate and sweetness and makes the simple morning black cup of drip coffee a lot more interesting than usual. And yes, I drink decaf sometimes because I'm very caffeine sensitive, but all of the high octane full calf coffees that I've gotten from Trade have been really delicious as well. Right now, Trade is offering new subscribers a total of $30 off their first order plus free shipping when you go to drinktrade.com/Brian. That's more than 40 cups of coffee for free, you guys. Get started at drinktrade.com/Brian and let Trade find a coffee you'll love. Again, that's drinktrade.com/Brian for $30 off. Now, I mentioned strength building folds when I mix this dough. I'm going to do 2 sets of them, one at 30 minutes here on the left side and one at 60 minutes here on the right. The move here is the classic one that I've shown you guys on this channel many times. It's basically a 4-way pull out and fold over, followed by a rounding maneuver that brings the dough into a nice taut ball. And there we go, much stronger and ready for 1 more hour of bulk fermentation. 1 hour later, or after 2 hours of total fermentation and 2 folds, this dough is just about doubled in size and now it's ready to shape. For that, I'll flour my dough, my board, spread that out, and then I'll flip out my dough. From there, I'll degas the dough into something that's easier to shape and less likely to balloon in the oven, and then I'll use my bench scraper to cut this down the middle into 2 roughly equivalent sized halves that are about 425 grams a piece or just under 1 pound. I'll scoot 1/2 off to the side, and then I'll use my fingertips to degas the remaining dough even more. As I degas this, I'm also pressing the dough into a longer, skinnier shape that's about 14 to 16 inches long by 8 to 10 inches wide. Once I'm there, I'll grab 6 to 8 ounces of diced, aged white cheddar cheese. This is Prairie Breeze, which, at least in the Midwest, is widely available and, in my opinion, is a white ched of very high quality. It's been aged for 9 to 12 months, it's super nutty and cheddary and has a little bit of those fun, crunchy cheese crystals going on. For 2 flatbreads, I cut about 1 pound's worth into a medium small dice like this. Keep it rustic on the size, by the way. These are mostly going to be melted and perfect squares, like won't matter. Now, I'll spread that cheese out onto the dough, and then I'll grab the bottom bit and start to roll the dough into a tube. As I go, I'm using my fingertips to pull the dough back into itself to create some tension and to try and make sure the cheese is getting tightly tucked into the mix. When I get to the tapered part at the end, I'll make sure to pull that out wide so that I can get an even spread of cheese throughout the flatbread. Once I've got a tight tube of dough and cheese like this, I'm going to scoot it over to a sheet tray parchment setup that's been sprayed well with pan spray. I'll roll out cheese doggy number 2, and once I've got 2 tubes of cheese dough, I'm going to cover this with another sheet tray and put it in the fridge until I'm ready to serve. If for you that's right now, great, go ahead. But let's assume that you've got some friends coming over later on for a party and you want to serve them warm cheese bread. So 2 to 6 to 24 hours later, I'm going to pull my dough out of the fridge, and as you can see, it's gassed up a little bit. If yours is gassed up more or less, no biggie. We're going to flatten this so it doesn't really matter. Now I'm going to grab another piece of parchment paper. I'll spray that with some pan spray or hit it with oil. Then I'll plop down one of my cheese breads. Next, I'll drizzle that with a little squeezer of olive oil, about 2 tables worth. And then using my fingertips, I'm going to push this dough into roughly the same dimensions that we had before we added the cheese. That's about 14 to 16 inches tall and 8 to 10 inches wide. Once I've got this pushed into something you could call a flatbread, I'll grab some fried panko breadcrumbs and sprinkle those on top to bring some tasty, crunchy pleasures. To make these breadcrumbs, I just hit a nonstick pan with a ton of olive oil, added in some panko, and fried it until it was golden brown. Next, I'll grab my pizza loading peel and scoot that under the paper, then turn the cheese bread 90 degrees so it'll fit perfectly on my pizza steel. Now, into the oven it goes to bake for 20 to 22 minutes at 450 F. If you don't have a pizza steel, I would say just invert a thick sheet tray and bake this on the back side. Just be careful because those are kind of awkward and don't heat nearly as evenly as a baking steel. After 20 minutes in a hot oven, it's time to pull this out. I'll drop it on a wire rack to cool, remove the oily cheese paper because that'll just steam things up and make them greasy. And there we go, a 1.5 pound slab of cheese and bread unified into one beautiful thing. Now, after letting this cool for at least 15 minutes, I'll cut into it, and now you can see the interior cheddar situation is perfect. What might have looked like an egregious amount of cheese in the roll-up phase now is clearly working out. There's a nice pocket of melty aged white cheddar in just about every bite. You guys, it might sound obvious to say this, but melted aged cheese inside of soft bread is good. From an evolutionary perspective, you are designed to love it, and you don't stand a chance against it. You'll eat minimum 20 bites of this, and I can't promise that you'll feel amazing afterwards, but the ride will be wild and worth it. So make a few of these to put out at your next party, because people will literally feel and act insane while eating it. Or make some gougeres if you want something a little bit more refined and slightly more nuanced. Either way, cheese bread tastes dope, and I hope you make some soon. Let's eat this thing.